Hello, everybody, and welcome back to a very special episode of Starseed Chats. Now, this is part 2 with Daryl James. So, if you have not listened to part 1, you should probably go do that. Daryl is a Navy veteran and also we can say a whistleblower on secret space programs. He's also had contact with Tigetan beings from the Pleiades star cluster. He's been in Solar Warden. He's been in what's known as the Dark Fleet, and we're going to be diving into all of that. Hi, Daryl. Welcome. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, sure, Lily. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, I'm really excited to dive into this, and your testimony is very unique. Well, because you are an actual veteran and you had some very interesting interactions on base. And can you remind me what the name of the base was where you were?
JMF RAF St. Maughan, Joint Maritime Force for the Navy and Royal Air Force in Cornwall, England.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, and you shared some really interesting information leading up to regaining some of these memories. So in part 1, you really went into detailed accounts of your experiences on base, and then you went off. You had this memory of being on the moon, and then suddenly you woke up and you're back in your bed on base, and you had missed a day, and you spoke to your one of your officers who started telling you about some of these things. Can you just kind of start off? We'll start off there, and then we'll deep dive into some of the memories that you ended up regaining from the Dark Fleet and Solar Warden and these Tigetans.
Yes. The XO, he told me all these different things about a life I had and children I have and wives I had, and I didn't really know how to take it. And I guess it would be good if I brought up something that I forgot to bring up last time, and it was I got done talking to him. I said I'm not going back into the chair.
And just to so what does this chair do again?
Well, it's a density chamber. It pushes you artificially from third to fifth. But I mean, he was afraid because I was still partial in fifth density, is how he put it. But then he found out it was something that happened to me as a child. It had to do with this woman when I was like 11. It was a Halloween party. Geez. Yeah, but that's like a whole new story. And yeah, it had to do with, I don't know, this lady just accidentally activated something, my DNA. I'm not sure what you would call it. But since it happened prior, she was a Kabbalist. And her husband was high-ranking mafia, and it was like a friend of my sister's named Jen, and they lived in Pinellas Park, Florida. And like in Florida, it's like they have a lot of people like Italian mafia from New York that have like vacation homes and things like that. And yeah, it was during a Halloween party, and she was getting ready for a Halloween party, and she like lifted up my chin, and kind of she said to Jen like telepathically like, "Is this him?" And she said yes. She said, you say the father can do it. And she said, yes. And what about the mother? She said, not as much. And the sister? And she said, no. And
the telepathy?
Yeah, telepathy. And they were just talking telepathically.
And can you say like around what age this was?
Probably 11. I was about 11 years old. And she just like grabbed my chin and lifted my head up and locked eyes with her. And like the whole room was kind of engulfed in colors, like orange, and like red and flecks of blue and things like that. And I thought I saw like, Nordics in the background. It kind of looked like they were like in the back as like all I could see was like her eyes, and like everything just became like, I don't know what it was. My aura was blowing up. It's what it felt like or something. She triggered something into me, and I just kind of went with it and said like, oh, you want to see this? And I just saw what I felt like, what I can do. It's kind of how it felt like. And I think it was something they were getting me ready for, because other events happen in the sense that older ETs can go into your past and kind of alter things. All ETs have the ability of going forward, but older ETs can actually go into the past and alter parts of your life. And yeah, she just shook I heard the girl screaming outside, like in the TV room. And she like shook my chin and kind of like snapped me out of it. And then when we left the bed, she said, you're a powerful little boy, don't you? And I said, yes. She said, good, now go play. Anyways, to make it shorter, it was just we went out the room, and some of the girls were saying, "Hey, did you see that? It looked like the house was on fire." They were screaming, but my sister didn't see it, and a couple others didn't see it, but others did see it. And it was just something where I felt like I was like hallucinating after that for like years, and I don't think it ever went away. I think I just got used to it. And Robert,
Did it? Would you say that kind of like opened your third eye?
like it like blew open my third eye in the sense that yeah, it was. He said that's what put me partially in the fifth density, whatever that woman did.
Wow.
Like that. And so the chair couldn't push me properly down because it happened something prior in my life. It wasn't the chair that did it, activated it. It was something else prior in my life. So that's why like I wasn't put properly down in the third density. Is kind of what he said. But yeah, it's like a density chamber, and I don't know if it erases the mind because whenever I had to, talk to Aquino after all this, I think it does, but maybe they can avoid that part. But yeah, it's like I still had memory, but I went through like you go through like a temporary amnesia, I guess you would say, is kind of what it's like in the sense that, but I mean, it can also wipe mind too. I'm not 100% familiar with it. I think a lot of the med bed can do things like that, take out certain parts of memory. And they always give you, they always put you in a med bed at the end of the program to kind of give you a clean bill of health. It's like part of the program. It's like they'll put you in a med bed afterwards.
Okay, and just to kind of set this up real quick, a little bit more. So this was upon you returning from a 20 and back program where you were taken out for 20 years, served in these programs, and then put back into the density chair, and your mind was kind of like wiped. Just wanted to set that up for people. And that's super fascinating about the third eye. I wanted to ask real quick on that. Did you always remember that strange experience where that woman held your chin up, or is that something that you remembered afterwards?
Well, I mean, I guess it was something I always remembered, but it was a pretty remarkable experience. And it was one of those things where I just kind of put it away in the back of my mind. And I remember like before Jen left for New York, they were going back up to New York. And we got together and she said something like, don't you remember that? Like what you did? Like, you scared my mom. She's like, I've never seen my mom scared before. And like, you scared my mom. And I was just like, and I said, yeah, I remember that. But it was just, I don't know. I don't know. It's just remarkable kind of, I guess you would say, what the mind can just kind of accept. I don't think people really realize that. And it was just something like I said, my life was not the same after that. It was very weird. It was like, I could see colors that weren't there. I remember I kept on seeing like almost like shadow people. It looked like sometimes at the corner of my eye. I felt like I was kind of stuck in between like two radio stations, I guess you would say. I wasn't like on one station. I was like stuck in the middle of two, and that's kind of how it felt. And it was kind of interfering with like my life in a way because I was kind of stuck partially in a higher density, even though I wasn't fully in that density. But that's what it felt like. It felt like, yeah, like both sides, both densities were kind of getting screwed up because I was kind of stuck in the middle. That's
Okay.
how it felt.
Okay, interesting. I think that's really helpful to understand that part of your background. Yeah, really fascinating. Okay, so you're put into the chair. Your memories are mostly or you said you went through a period of amnesia. And then what? Walk us through what happened next and then regaining your memories of being in these programs.
Well, I mean, I was going to bring up how Robert tried like one more time, the XO, to get me to go back. It was like the last Friday. I think I was like flying on a plane like Sunday or Monday or something like that. And it was like the last Friday night. And he used that 5G again, the 5G tower, where they could stick a microwave beam. That's what 5G is. What I know what it is for. They can put a microwave. It creates a microwave beam that can go into a room or a house. It can look around and they can talk if they want. He tried like good cop, bad cop in me right away. He said like all the things I promised you, with the med bed, I'll do that, but you have to come right now. And, you're not going to get revenge on these people, on these off-world Germans. Cause he told me about, the off-world Germans and everything like that. He's like, that's a childish way to think. And I said, I remember what you did to me now. Because he said, like, I did something to you when he was talking to me in the office, but he didn't want to mention it. He said, you'll remember in the future. He's like, but I can't say, I won't say. And I said, you gutted me. because he was like forced to participate in the torture. Like when I came back, it's kind of like what reptiles do. If they know someone's close to you and stuff like that, they do that. But and I kind of heard him cry or something, but I was more mad because I didn't remember everything yet. I just remembered bits and pieces.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, he said they made me do it. They would have hurt my daughter. I had to do it. I'm sorry. He was saying things like that. And I said, if I was you and you were me and you told me that, if I went back into this chair and I got my memory wiped and you would make your life so much better, but you'd forget all about your wife and daughter, would you do it? And he said, I don't know. And I said, you wouldn't do it. You wouldn't. I insulted him pretty bad. And I just threw the my covers over my head, and then the voice kind of faded away. It just went away. He tried one more time to try to get me into the chair, and I wouldn't do it. And so I processed out in like Norfolk, Virginia, and I had the names on a Post-it note. I wrote the names that he gave me on a Post-it note, and I wrote them down. And when I was in Norfolk, I would read them every day, like every morning when I woke up and every evening before I went to bed. And I had like this list of names. And I kind of like realized that if I kept doing this, this was going to destroy me, as he put it. Like this was like I was going to end my life if like I was going to keep focusing on this. So I kind of just crumpled it up and I threw it away. And I just kind of like carried on with life. I don't know. I just kind of stuck it in the back of my head. And, I just couldn't accept it. I guess, my mind couldn't accept it. And years went by, and there were times where it kind of crept up and then it went back away, if that makes sense. It crept up and it went back away.
Some of these memories.
Yeah, these memories. Yeah. And they say, that if the sometimes suppressed memories, they'll kind of creep up from the subconscious. And this is what doctors say. They'll sometimes creep up from the subconscious, but if the conscious can't accept them, then they just push it back down. Like, oh, he's not ready yet, and the mind will just push it back down, and it'll go back into a suppressed memory. So that kind of happened a few times, and it wasn't until I got my house and I was kind of looking out of my bedroom window. I was just staring out of my bedroom window, and when I came back, there were friends, and this was kind of weird. This goes into like further in my past, and this goes into like older ET stuff that kind of altered my past, which I said they can do. Negative ETs, reptiles and things like that. They can alter your past. They can go into your past and alter things. They can influence people to do things to you, things like that, because they're kind of attached to you. It's just like this weird thing that they can do. But I met like old friends from like middle school, and they brought up like suppressed memories I had, things I didn't remember that happened, that they all knew about. And they're like, you don't remember that? And I said, no. So it was just like, boom, boom. I kept on having old friends, bumping into them at bars, bumping into them at clubs, bumping into them. And I was told by Robert that higher density beings can manipulate lower densities. So I think that's what was happening. I think it was almost like the Taygethans or the Pleiadians. They're like, hey, wake up, like snap out of it. Like try to remember this, like wake up. That's almost like what it felt like, And so nothing like that happened again for a while. I was looking out of my bedroom window, I don't know, 6 years ago or something like that. And I just started remembering like one suppressed memory from a childhood after another. And then it was just like, oh God, I had this conversation with the XO. Like, and I remember, and it was just like, boom. And like everything came back. And what I was told is kind of like the reason it happened that way was because it wasn't until I felt completely safe, like financially safe. I had a roof over my head, things like that, where it felt like my subconscious could kind of let everything go and let all these, and that's kind of like how suppressed memories actually work. It's not until you actually get into a situation where you feel like completely safe, and then all of a sudden the mind just lets all of this go. And that's kind of like how I remembered everything. And it was just like a flood all at once.
Wow.
And I would get little bits and pieces here, but then I would just kind of like, whatever, that didn't happen. You know what I mean? It was like my mind wasn't ready to accept it yet. And that's kind of how it happened. And so I can go on with the story as far as.
Yeah, that is fantastic and makes a lot of sense about the memories, and it's about timing. And then whenever you say you feel the Taygetans, these Pleiadian beings were kind of, they've been with you for a while, and they've been kind of maybe dropping some hints here and there to trying to get you to kind of wake up and remember?
Yeah, because like I said, it's less about the program. I think people focus too much about the program, and it's more about that's just how time travel works. It's like I'm sharing a consciousness with like another me up there. When there's two of you at one time in the universe, it's kind of like there can only be one consciousness. So I'm sharing a soul with this other person, even though he's me, but like from the past, kind of a younger me, if that makes sense. That's just like the way time travel works. And so they were always with me, I guess you would say, in a way, because they're still with me up there and we're sharing the same soul. We're sharing the same consciousness. So yes, like they were always with me because, as I said before, we're sharing the same consciousness, and that's kind of like how it works. It's less about you're just getting a mind wipe. You're basically time traveling, getting a mind wipe, and getting age regress. But it's mostly just the whole the riddle of time travel, the way it works. It's like you're sharing a soul with another person. If there's 5 of you at one time, you get very thin, and it gets more difficult on all of you because it's just like it's almost like putting too many plugs in one socket. You know, you're like it gets harder and harder. And then if you go further down time where there's only one of you, then you're more whole, you're more complete. But if there's several of you in the universe at one time in different places of the universes, it's just like you're sharing the same consciousness, and it gets thinner and thinner and more difficult to kind of function. It's kind of like an overload on the soul, if that makes sense.
Yes, completely. Okay. Did you have anything you wanted to add on that?
No,
Oh,
not really. Yeah.
okay. So what's interesting about your story, and it sounds like maybe this happens a lot. So we're going to dive into the programs just a bit. So you wanted to sign up through the Navy, like officially sign up for a positive program. You wanted to help, and so you were going to be put into Solar Warden, right? But then what did you gouge the eye of this reptilian, and then so you ended up in the Dark Fleet as punishment,
In
basically.
the mines originally as
Okay.
punishment.
Okay. Can you just touch on that a little bit and then how Solar Warden came in and you transferred over?
Yeah, I was going to be put in the mines, and what I was told, it
On the
was
moon.
yeah, mines in the moon. And it was going to be harsh punishment. There's like a certain select group of people that get put in for this punishment. They don't get their mind wiped. They get age regress. They get sent back in time, but their mind isn't wiped. And most of them kill themselves. And that's what was going to happen to me. So I was working in the mines, and then I actually saw Robert. And Robert said he kept track of me because I asked questions that no one ever asked. I asked if I when he first approached me to the program, I asked if 20 years is a long time, would I be able to have children? And he said, like, yes, with your scores, you'll be expected to have children. And I said, well, what will happen to my children? And he said, they'll be taken care of. And I said, well, will I ever be able to see them again? And he said, no. And I said, well, that sounds very sad. And he said, trust me, Mr. James, you won't remember a thing. And then I also asked about why the scanner that I walked through, why that technology wasn't available to the public. Like they could detect if you had clots or anything like that. They could, give you some sort of forewarning before anything happened to you, like a heart attack, like what happened to my dad when I was young. And he said no one ever really asked that. They just joined the question. So he kind of kept an eye on me. He found me like interesting because I kind of thought of the future and was, I just didn't join. I wanted to ask questions. And I wanted to do it to try to better everybody. I thought if I was going to do this, I'd do this for a reason. And so, yeah, he kept track of me. And I remember I saw him, in the mines of the moon, and I didn't remember who he was. I didn't know who he was, but I saw a man with like white hair and black eyebrows. And he was talking to one of the Germans, one of the off-world Germans. And then the off-world German came up to me and he put like, I don't know what, like a device in front of me. And I guess he like picked up my scores, and then he said, you're coming with me. So I came with him. And they took me to a table, and there was one of those, I don't know what they're called, the tall whites, but they're not the whites. I don't know, the big black eyes. They're bug-like. They're very pale, chalky looking, long face, but they're very tall. They're like 7 feet tall. And it was in the corner of the room, and there was a table, and they strapped me down to the table. Like it was those drones were kind of like pulling me over to this table, the little brown drones, they called them, with the big
Right.
black eyes, but they were small. And strapped me to like a table, my head, everything. And then there was like a doctor, and he had like a, like a mask and everything on. He looked like he was in scrubs. And he showed me a needle, and he said, I'm going to use this to put in your implant. And then he like put it right through my skull and then like injected something into my brain. And then the table like kind of tipped over. And I guess there was a hole in the back, and I felt like a spinal tap, like a needle going into my spine, and something like cold going down. And I think that was like the tech, like what people call the black goo and stuff, the AI they put into you whenever you're going to join one of the more negative programs. And then they like put me in a room for like a while, 24 hours or so, and let it all kind of take hold of me. And then I got like washed off. Like I was given a bag full of like, just a big, large duffel bag full of uniforms and stuff like that. And I was off. And yeah, I was so that was the Dark Fleet, Knockoff and things like that. And they call it. And yeah, I was trained to be a pilot originally with a woman. And then once they found out I had experience, like they looked up my records, I guess, and they said you were in the Middle East. And then once they found out I was in the Middle East, they started putting me on Mars a lot. And I became almost like a sergeant or a chief. Like I started breaking new people in. I was training new people. New officers from the academy, things like that. And it was primarily...
Sorry, go ahead.
It was primarily to catch to get like insectoids, like mantises. They're very good with like DNA manipulation. Everything kind of has like a clique in the universe, and their clique is kind of like they're very good at perfecting DNA manipulation. So the reptiles would want them for their knowledge on DNA and things like that. And that's what I did. And it was primarily like capturing other beings. It wasn't really like to kill, it was to capture. And I remember there were certain things. I mean, if you want to go on more on like Mars and everything, it was like, I remember like there was the first officer who was actually the S3, which is weird. He was the S3 on base, which is like fourth in command. But it seemed like they wanted to keep everybody kind of close, so they could keep track of everybody on this base. And he was the S3 was actually the first officer on the ship. And they time travel so much, they get age regress. These guys live over 800 years. That's like the true potential of people from Earth. We should actually live more like 800 years and not just, 80 years like we do. And so, yeah, he was the first officer, and he was really the only one I knew from the base. But I became good friends with him, and he was checking my gear kind of. They give you these suits that cloak, and they can handle like more like high velocity type things. They're not really that good at hand-to-hand weapons that ETs use, but they're more good at like high velocity. It's kind of like ET tech. It does something to a T. Like it does something perfectly. So it's good at handling, like you could even feel things like rail guns, which we have on ships, but they're large, but they have them in rifle form. They have things like plasma, laser, but unless you're expecting like vehicles, you only really get issued like rail guns and things like that. They have which is just magnets basically. You're firing around from extremely powerful like magnet, and they have them on naval ships, but they're the size of a cannon. Mm-hmm. And
so this is on Mars, right?
Yeah, this is on Mars.
Okay. And so you said mostly you were capturing these mantis beings who are native to Mars or who live on Mars. And I've also heard of these spiders that are on Mars. Could you explain to us, if you can recall, just a little bit more about like kind of what Mars was like?
It was arid. It had shrubs. It had like primitive reptiles. It had reptiles, and it was almost like like an Amish community of reptiles where they didn't really have advanced technology. They were more like primitive, but it was like voluntarily. It was like a way to pay for, I don't know. It was almost like I don't know. They were like an Amish reptile almost. They were like more primitive. They only used a certain amount of technology, and they lived on Mars. Yeah, but there were also, like monitor lizards. They look kind of like big lizards, four-legged lizards and things like that. And there were certain things on Mars. And he told me, like, this was like the first officer, as he was checking my gear, he said, if the mantises run into a cave, don't follow them. I said, why? He said, because There's spiders in there, and they're 3 meters in diameter, so about 9 to 10 feet. And I was like, wow, you know. And anyways, yeah, I would see that happen. They would run in. They would run into these caves, and I would just cloak and kind of kneel down because I really wasn't interested in the spiders. I wanted to catch this mantis. So I figured, you know, if they went back into the cave, he would just, you know, the mantis would just think, you know, they must have got him, and he'd come back out, which worked most of the time. And like this, the first officer explained to me they're about as smart as a dog, these spiders.
Mm-hmm.
And so it would run to the cave, and then 3 or 4 of these large spiders would come out. And I would just cloak, and I'd kneel down, and they kind of just lose interest in you. They would kind of shuffle out, and they had those 2 little front legs like spiders do, like 2 front hands, and they'd slam them on the ground and wait because they pick up everything with vibration. That's why they live in caves. They don't spin webs, but the caves are their webs because there's a lot of sandstorms and things like that. So smaller animals will go in there and they'll catch them, and that's kind of like how it works. And then it would dart around and slam its 2 fronts on the ground again and wait. So it was kind of almost like bluffing me into getting to move or run away, so it knew where I was. And yeah, usually you just wait, and they would just lose interest in you like a dog, like a minute or so, and then they would just go back in. But it was like these mantises, they're so telepathic, they were able to kind of send these out. Like they were able to control them like telepathically and send them out as like attack dogs almost.
Wow.
And yeah, they were good at like genetically engineering weapons in the sense that they kind of created like these beetles like the size of a football, and they could send like thousands of them at you at a time. And it was one of those things where if it was only a few of them, it wasn't dangerous. But if it was thousands, it was very dangerous, and you just have to like run away. And so they had weapons like that. You know, there was different incidences of like one time, one of them led us through a cavern, and I was with a team. I had 3 others with me, and one of these mantises led us through like a canyon, and we were running through this canyon, and it just stopped. And I thought it was suspicious. It just stopped and turned around, and it was pretty far. It was like 50 yards ahead of us. So I just stopped too, and I told everybody to stop, and it turned around. And then like I looked around, and we were just surrounded by caves, and like just all these like hundreds of spiders came out. It just created like a link with all these spiders and sent them out after us. And then it raised its like hands up, and kind of like homing pigeons, like all these beetles came up, and they kind of swirled around a couple of times, and then they came right at us, and we just ran. Like we just had to run away. And that was one of the other incidents I remember on Mars. They were probably the ETs that were most human in the sense of like their hospitality, if that makes sense. If they invited you into their house, they had a good sense of humor. They would laugh at your jokes.
Who are you talking about?
The mantises, like the mantis. They seemed the most human in the sense of like I don't know. They kind of were joking. They kind of understood jokes. Most ETs, they don't understand jokes. They don't understand, sarcasm and things like that. And they would give you food. They would offer you food. Most ETs don't offer anything. If you ask, they'll give you, but most ETs don't offer that very much. And they would say, have a seat. Would you like something to eat? Would you like something to drink? They kind of have more of a hospitality in the sense of like Earth, if that makes sense. So, and I heard that they were a lot of our genetic engineering and things like that. These mantises, like as people on Earth, as humans, they have a lot to do with it.
Right. So with this dark fleet, sorry, there's a little bit of an echo here. So the dark fleet was capturing these mantises so that they could do genetic manipulation for them against their will.
Well, so it was more like they would I think they would strap them into like almost like a chair or a machine, and they can just extract information from them.
Oh, interesting.
Need for interrogation or anything. They can just kind of find the memories they wanted, or the knowledge that they wanted from these mantises. And it was kind of like what do you call it? Like a storming the castle type thing of a policy that the reptiles had, in the sense that if you give us what we want, we'll just take who we want, and we won't hurt the rest of you. But if you fight back, then we'll kill all of you. And that's kind of like how it was. It was just, it was that kind of mentality.
Sounds about right.
Yeah.
Okay. I had one more question about Mars. So did you get any that you can remember, any like augmentation, and were you kind of like a do you remember getting anything like that? Any like augmentation?
Maybe in the eye or something like that, but not a lot. I mean, the suits themselves that you put on were like a consciousness. There was a conscious. The reptiles use consciousness for everything. Everything that had AI had like a soul in it, basically. And I could just speak to the suit, that I was wearing, and the suit was like an augmentation in itself. And you could like leap pretty far with these suits. You could run pretty fast in these suits. I don't remember if the gravity was all that much different on Mars, but yeah, it was just the biggest augmentation I can remember is the actual suits that you would wear. And you could breathe on Mars, but it was almost one of those type of things where if you tried to run, you'd pass out from lack of oxygen. It had like 20% of the oxygen that Earth did, something
Okay.
similar to that. It was almost like
Right.
trying to run in the mountains. You would like faint. You'd pass out from lack of oxygen.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. So moving forward to Solar Warden, like how did that happen? Did they come pick you up or what?
Well, it was like I was getting established. I was getting everything they wanted. I was getting everything that the Dark Fleet wanted, and it got to a point where I was given like kind of like a like a pass to go on their world to kind of gain citizenship. And I met a woman there named Helen.
A German world?
A German world woman. Yeah. And the German world was, and I remember Robert said, like, what was the German world like? And I thought about it, and it was strange because it was just like, as he was asking me things, it was like always in the back of my mind, but I just forgotten about it. I can't explain.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, it was like the 40s. And he said, like, what do you mean? And I said, men wear suits and fedoras and women wear dresses and pillbox hats. But it was just very high tech. But at the same time, the architecture was very German. The housing and things like that, even the buildings, it was like going through like an old town, like an old time, like German town, if that makes sense. Their public transit was very advanced. They had these fast moving sidewalks. They also had like kind of trams. It seemed very segregated in the sense of men and women. Men usually went on these high-moving sidewalks. It was kind of like branches that were slower, and they slowly speed you up, and then you hit it like a main path, and you were going about 60 miles an hour. And it was just like if you wanted to step off at your stop, you step off, and these other branches, they were going fast at first, and they'd slow you down until you could just step off like a conveyor belt almost. And then it seemed like young children and women mostly took more of like these trams and things like that. And yeah, so I was kind of established. I was in almost like I was like a select, I guess you'd call it, like a Deutsch select, a German select. I was kind of like in the process of gaining some sort of citizenship. I was engaged, and then I was with the first officer, who was a good friend of mine, and he said, "We're going to meet the ones we've been fighting. They're not going to attack the master, but if they do, protect the master." And the master was like the head reptile. There was always like a head reptile that was oversee every ship in the Dark Fleet. And so we came out, and we were in like a space station almost, and it was kind of like a UN. A lot of trade happened there. ETs like to trade, but it was also for things like warring factions to discuss peace. It was like a place for different trade between worlds, to establish different trade routes between worlds. And it was kind of like a rectangular box we were in. And there was like windows on two sides. And behind us, there was like several floors of different, just office areas or areas to trade. Like I said, ETs are big on trade.
Do you know where this was?
No, it was just out. It was just, I don't know where it was. It was just like this neutral kind of UN out in the middle of wherever. I don't know what star system or anything. I don't remember things like that. Robert told me I had been to more worlds than him, but I don't remember, and he was over 400 years old. He said he was around 400. He said, "You've been to more worlds than me."
Wow.
Because he'd been age regressed so many times. And yeah, I thought only, drones, grays, reptiles were the only thing out there. Like that's all I knew. And when we came onto this space station, it was just everything. There were lyrans, there were canine, feline. Most of it was small. Most of it was like, I don't know how to explain it, like about a foot to a foot and a half. Just small little beings wearing robes. Most things wore robes. Some of them wore the tight blue uniforms. And there was almost like an unsaid rule that larger beings kind of walk slowly, very slowly, and these smaller beings would be darting around and kind of like walking around them, running around very quickly around them.
Mhm.
And, it was like me and the first officer, the captain, and the reptile. And a woman came up, like a Nordic woman and a man. It was a man and a woman. They were wearing the tight blue suits. And it's kind of like this is how their negotiations work, in the sense that the woman comes up first and is kind of casual and polite. And if that doesn't work, then the man comes up and he gives like the laws you've broken. So it's like she came up and she said, and I could hear them speaking telepathically. And she said it was something about like cargo. It was like it was almost like they didn't want me to know, or maybe that's just how they addressed me. And I didn't know if they were talking about me or what. And it was strange. And she said something like, "The cargo belongs to us. You know, it belongs to us. You took it illegally. You know, you need to give the cargo back to us." And then the master said, "You know, since we invested so much time and resources into this cargo, and now rightfully belongs to us." And then the man came forward with like a smart glass pad, and he basically showed like I don't know, like some sort of rules and regulations, and said, you know, the cargo rightfully belongs to us. If you don't give it to us right now, it'll be considered an act of war. And then like the reptile like leaned over and he read everything on it, and he just kind of threw his hands up and he walked away. And the woman came up to me and she said, "You're coming with us now." And I said, "Can I get my things?" And she said, "Yes." And I went back and I grabbed my things. I grabbed my guitar. I grabbed my sheet music. I really didn't have very much, and I pretty much just left with that. And then I went with her, and went with them, and we came to almost like a beam ship. It just looked like a poured piece of metal, like smooth metal, no seams or rivets. We went into it, and there was a back area, and there was like a long curved bench. And like I said, it was just like a law. And then they said, "Sit here," and I sat down at the bench. And they went to the front area, and like it was a door, and I couldn't see anything, and I was there for a while. And then eventually they came out and they sat down in front of each other. They were like, looking at each other and like looking at me and looking at each other. And she said something like, "He looks disturbed," telepathically. And then he said, "Wouldn't you be if you had to live with them?" And whenever I said, I looked over, they both like realized right away. And they both kind of like, it was weird. They were looking at each other and they turned their head and they cocked their heads towards each other like at the same time with like big eyes. Like they had really big eyes. And then it was almost like it was like a white light kind of came from them, where all I could see was like their eyes. It was like kind of like they were showing me like who they really were. It was something that surprised them. And then the man came up to me and he kneeled down in front of me and he said telepathically, "Can you hear what I'm saying to you?" And that's kind of like the telephone ring for an ET. That's like their trigger phrase to see if you are. And in my head, I said, yes, but it's something they do, or they want something physical, because they want you to realize this isn't just a voice in your head. This is real. So he said it again. He said, "Can you hear what I'm saying to you?" And I nodded my head. And then he went back to her. And if they focus in on each other, they can have a private conversation. So they focused in on each other and I couldn't hear what they were saying. Anyways, that happened that way. Eventually, like, I said, can I sleep? And he like pushed something on the side of the ship, and just like a bed kind of came out. And it was just like a bed just came out. And then like in this back quarters of this small craft. And so I eventually arrived at Solar Warden. I got processed in. And I remember I was still in like the Dark Fleet uniform. And Mother was there. And Mother was like the tall Tigetan woman. She had long silver hair. She was probably almost like 7 feet tall. They get very tall as they get older. Their bones continue to grow. And she was kind of wearing like a white and silver kind of dress, almost like they wore almost like a robe with like a lab coat over top of it. It's like that's like a traditional thing that they wear. And I was walking behind these two people, this man and woman, and she just put a foot in front of me, and she said, "Your name's Daryl," out loud to me. And I said, "Who told you that?" And she said, "No one. I plucked it from your mind." And then she just put her foot away and she walked past, and I was like, that was strange. And it's a phrase that they use where they'll go deep into like your subconscious and they can figure out your name. When I was kind of like their enemy, I guess you would say. So it was almost like I had to go through a trial where they went deep into my mind, where I had no more secrets with them. They knew everything about me. And that it's like something that they only do. It's considered unethical to positive ETs, but if it's more of like a interrogation thing, and it's more of like to see like what your true intentions are. Can we trust you? Things like that. That's kind of like what it's for. While the reptiles just do it for fun, kind of thing. But they do it when they feel like it calls for it. And the first day I was working, he was the co-pilot, and she was like kind of like a look for anomalies in space, like a science officer almost. It was kind of like that. And he was navigation and weapons, and they were training me to be a pilot. And the first day it was just something kind of like they created like a telepathic link with like a computer with me almost. And I could see him, but then I could see like these shapes. And it was like all these geometrical shapes, and I had to kind of like pull them apart, turn them inside out, put them back together. It was just like a spatial recognition kind of test. No, I'm sorry. The first day was speaking telepathically with him. That was the first day. Get a stronger telepathic link with him. The more you communicate with someone, the more you live with someone, the stronger of a link that you have. So the first day was creating like a stronger telepathic link with him. And then the second day was that. It was like a machine, a computer kind of pulling these shapes apart, putting them back together. It made me nauseous. I asked if I could take a break. He said no, and we kept on going. And then the third day I was like piloting the ship, and the ship has 2 black panels that you put your hands on, and then you just clear your thoughts. And I would hear like a female voice in my head say, "Good morning, Daryl." And I would say, "Good morning, Mama Bear," because that's what Robert told me I nicknamed the ship. He said, since you were the pilot, he said the official name of the ship was the USS SS, and the extra SS was for secret space. The USS SS Nimitz was the official name of the ship. But he said you nicknamed the ship Mama Bear because you communicated with the ship the most. So yeah, and that's kind of how it works. And it's almost like the ship becomes like an extension of your body. There's like a large smart glass pad on a swing arm, which is used for like docking and departing, because they have like space stations above worlds where these larger, like 4-kilometer long ships will actually dock onto like a space station, and then you'll take smaller craft to go onto a world. You can't just land this ship on a world, so it just stays out, and then you take smaller craft to go onto the world. And yeah, that's kind of like how my life was for a while. And I was like eating with them one day, and we were all living together. Like they were on one side, like the man was in the corner, the woman was like right across from me, and I was on the other side of the room. And there was like a shower, and there was like a bathroom area. And the shower, you don't need towels. Like they kind of, there's like a warm air just kind of squeegees you off almost after you're done. Is almost what it's like. It's almost like those and things they have. It's kind of like that, but for your whole body.
I felt that. I was like, when are we gonna have that? Like, I've thought of that before. You see that depicted in the movie. I think it's Titan AD, maybe. Interesting. So I wanted to ask, what types of beings were you seeing in Solar Warden, and what did it seem like? So, what were you doing in Solar Warden? What's the mission of Solar Warden? Can you kind of go into that? So the beings that you were seeing, the mission of Solar Warden, what is it?
The mission of Solar Warden is to basically protect the solar system. There's 2 branches. There's one that stays within the asteroid belt, and one that goes beyond the asteroid belt, and is more for establishing connection and peace with other beings. So I would kind of go do both. There was one, it was almost like we were the, it was just like the wardens of the solar system, I guess you would say. It was like a way to guard the solar system. And it was, the way it's explained to me, it was their technology, like Tagetan, Pleiadian technology, but our materials, our titanium, things like that. They could forge titanium much stronger than we can. They could purify it a lot stronger than we can. But one of the rules was we can, what do they call it? Commandeer the ship anytime we want. It's kind of like what one of the rules was. Like, we'll give you our technology. You give us the materials. but we can commandeer this ship anytime we want. And it's not permanently, it's just something in an emergency. If we want to take control, like take control of the ship, we will. And that's like the rules. And you know, we agreed to it. The United States Navy agreed to this. And it's other branches as well. I don't think it's just like the United States. I think, or other countries as well. But we were primarily working with them. And they seem to be one of the major forces fighting like the Draconian Empire. Like they're one of the major ones. And the other ones are more, I don't know, maybe vassal states like the Dark Fleet was of the Draconian Empire. I think the Canines were like that. The more, you know, then they look just like the Egyptian gods. You know, you see the Egyptian god with like the long muzzle and the black. It looks almost like a Doberman Pinscher with the pricked up ears and stuff like that. Like that's what the canines look like. And the felines are similar and things like that. And I was told they used to walk amongst us on Earth and we worship them as gods. Like that's kind of like, and so all those statues are accurate. Like that's not, you know, all the paintings and depictions that's all real. That's not imagination. But yeah, and so yeah, that was the primary thing I remember. So either to make contact with other beings and make peace with them and try to make alliances with them, or to guard the solar system itself. And I was kind of doing both. I would do both. There would be shift changes. You know, it seemed like there were both. And a lot of it was boring. Some of it wasn't. You know, and it was probably like my third day there, and I remember we were just talking and eating, and they're really big on the ships. They were vegetarians, and they would drink like a blue liquid that would give them like their proteins and amino acids and things like that you couldn't get from just fruits and vegetables. And, but on their world they eat fish, but they couldn't have a fish hatchery on the ship. But about a third of the ship is like a hydroponics farm because they're very big on eating fresh. There's something about, they say, you know, they brag about how their food is like off the vine and on your plate in 20 minutes pretty much. There's something about very fresh food they feel is helps with their longevity, living a long time and things like that.
Right.
And so yeah, I was sitting down eating with them, and I was just living in the same room with them. And I don't know how it came up, but I was just talking about being in the Dark Fleet and the reptiles. And this was the woman Swaru, and the woman I knew. And she said, we knew you were there with them. She said, we didn't expect you to be in the mines. We didn't expect you to poke the reptile in the eye. That was a variable we weren't expecting. She goes, but we knew you were going to be in the Dark Fleet. And I said, why? And she said, because we wanted you to learn from them. And I said, like, so you knew I was there, like amongst those things, and they were like, there was suffering and, you know, like punishments and everything else, and you didn't do anything to help me. And she just went, like, it was just very like nonchalant, like you had to learn, because it's like what people understand is these beings live over 3,000 years. So for them, it's like, I don't know, you know, 2 years is like what? Like a day, you know what I mean, to them. So it's like you're looking at it like differently, you know what I mean? They look at things differently. They live much longer. They look at everything differently. And she's like, yeah, we wanted you to learn from that. And I got really furious. And I just like, got up because I just thought it was just, and the way she was just acting, it was just, it seemed like she was insincere and didn't care. So I got up and I like picked up my guitar and I started playing. And that's like what I did when I got frustrated or upset. And then they were sitting down in front of me and just sitting down, like amazed, like their eyes were open, their mouths were open. They were like amazed. And I remember the man said, how did you do that? Like they don't really have that kind of, they have music in a sense, but it's more like natural sounds from their world all kind of put together in like a tempo. But they really don't have the concept of like harmony and melody and, you know, like we do in our music. And I said something like, you know, that wasn't for you. That was for me. I said, in fact, I don't want to like, you know, see either of you ever again. I was pretty ticked off. And then he like I was yelling and he started yelling back at me. And he said, you know, well, it's going to be difficult to work with us if you never want to see us. And I was like, I'll work, you know, I'll be professional, but I never want to, you know, see any of you again. And I was yelling and he said, you know, I could overpower you if I wanted to, Daryl. You know that, don't you? And I just threw my guitar on the bed and I said, you know, screw you. And I walked out. And so it was just, I didn't understand like the way they thought. It was just, it's difficult to explain. They're fighting against the Draconian Empire. So it's like they would be peaceful, in my opinion, if that wasn't the case. But it's kind of like they had to kind of take a policy of a few eggs have to be broken in order to save us. To make an omelet, a few eggs, they kind of have that policy in the sense of, we have to fight these beings or we'll all be slaves. Like we have to take like extreme measures or we're all going to be slaves. And they're big picture beings. They can see down timelines. They can see things. So it's like they kind of know what they're doing. And it may seem cruel, to beings that only live 80 years, but to them, it's just more of a big picture. Like they're doing things to overall win this war. And that's kind of like how they see it. And since the reptiles are very cruel, I wouldn't say they're cruel, but they just sometimes take extreme measures. And I didn't really see it that way at the time.
Yeah.
And,
yeah, I mean, that makes perfect sense. And I feel that too. I definitely resonate with that. I can see that. Kind of like for the greater good type thing. Sacrifice, they tell me a lot. Sacrifice, sacrifices have been made. I've made a lot of sacrifices. You've made a lot of sacrifices. We've signed up to experience these things, especially the star seeds, light workers, and then the ones who have been taken into these programs on a highest level. We've volunteered to do these things and undergo some of these very difficult situations and memories and traumas and stuff like that for the greater good, to expose it, to remember it, to expose it, to bring it down.
And that's what they're doing with us right now, I think. I mean, I think it's a big part of what's happening right now. And I mean, that was something that Robert told me. He was like, the wound has to be clean before it's dressed. And right now we're cleaning the wound. And the cleaning of the wound is like the most painful process. So it's like we're kind of going through like this most painful process because it has to be done. You just can't dress a dirty wound. You have to clean it first.
Mm-hmm.
So, like I was kind of on the outs with them for a while. And they really weren't talking to me. And it was just like that. And then I started liking her. And
Which one? Which one?
Swaru, the woman that we were living with. And, I got to a point where I was just, she wouldn't talk back. Like she was kind of upset with me. And it was just kind of like real life in the sense that I had to apologize. Like I'm sorry for what I did. I'm sorry for what I said. I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have said those things. It was kind of like that. And with them, it's very much honesty. Everything is honesty to a point where it would be uncomfortable to a third density being. Fifth density beings in general are just very honest about everything. You're telepaths. There's nothing you can hide. There's no point. It's silly. You just have to get over your ego and you just have to be extremely honest. And I pretty much just got to a point where I said, like, I think you're beautiful. I want to have children with you. And I was telling her this and I was telling her this. And it took like days. It's almost like a courtship kind of thing where she acts like you're not talking to her. She'll just kind of look away. And then she'll just keep on doing what she's doing. And then you'll come back the next day and you try again. And then you come back. And then by like the third or fourth time, it's like a yes or a no. And
okay.
And so yeah, she said yes. And then, she just started like disrobing. And it was just like that. It was like, I was like, whoa, okay. And then the way they have like, have sex is different than us. And that's kind of an important part. And it's more of the man's on the bottom, the woman's on top. She looked up for a few seconds, looked down, locked eyes with me. We switched bodies. And that's how it started at first. My consciousness was in hers. Hers was in mine. It was kind of disturbing at first. And then we came back. And then I thought like, well, I came back. So it's not like I wasn't going to be stuck like that. Because I thought I was like, oh, I'm going to be stuck this way. And then what didn't happen that way. And then she did it again. She looked up. And then she looked down and locked eyes. And then, but this time it was more like an out-of-body experience where we were outside of the ship and it was just it was like omnipresence oneness with the universe, kind of, I guess you would say. And then it was almost just like I opened my eyes and it was over. And it was not so much as a physical kind of thing and more of a spiritual thing, I guess you would say, with their kind of relations. It's more like that. And so she was pregnant. I don't remember if the pregnancies were shorter than ours or longer than ours. I don't remember that. But then it was just, she got to a point where she said, when I have the baby, I'm going to change. And I said, oh, okay, that's fine. Like, I really didn't know. And like I said, if you don't ask something, they don't tell you anything. It's just something. And she kept telling me that. And then she eventually just looked at me and said, you need the experience, which is like what ET say to you. Like, if you're not listening to them, then you're just going to have to find out. And he left. Like, the navigator left. Like, he just left us by ourselves because he knew that she was going to give birth soon. And like, when women give birth, mother was the midwife. So this elder female who was tall with the silver hair, she was the midwife. And I remember one time I was on the ship, and there was this woman, I knew her, but I really didn't know her. And she just got up and walked away. And I said, where are you going? And she said, I'm going to witness. And then, I don't know, a couple minutes later, a man came and he took her place. And witness means all the women of the ship like witnessed the birth. And it's just one of those things. And so it's like something that men aren't really involved in. And
it's kind of like a ceremony.
I would guess. I mean, yeah, they do have ceremony. I wouldn't really call it a religion, but they do have ceremony. I mean, and then usually when there is ceremony, like it's a priestess, like a woman. It's not like, so it's like that. And they kind of have a policy where, and I remember there was like, there's duality to everything, even souls, even consciousness has duality.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if like people are going to find that controversial, but I remember like they have a policy where it's like men lead women in the physical and women lead men in the spiritual. It's kind of like that. Like that's kind of like how they believe. Like that's their belief. So it's like so the women are more of the priestess class and things like that. They're more of that kind of thing. Anyways, yeah, like and that was like what they did. They witnessed. They called it witness. And so she had the baby, and I didn't know what was happening. And she would just like lock eyes with the baby, like that was it. Like she was constantly trying to create like a telepathic link. Like she would just look. She barely ate. She slept with the baby. She did everything with the baby. She wouldn't talk to me. If she did talk to me, it was just like yes, no. It was just like that. And I thought she was kind of like losing her mind. I didn't know what was happening, so I didn't want others to know. So I kept it to myself because I didn't know what was happening. And I didn't want to lose her or anything like that. I still had this mentality of like the Dark Fleet or whatever. If she's unfit, maybe I'll lose her. So I was just kind of dealing with this. I didn't know what was wrong. And eventually I got to a point where we had a son, and Robert told me I named him David after my father. My first son, I named him David. And because I told her they would ask, they would say, would you like a boy or a girl? And I said, well, first I would like a boy. And then after that, we can have girls. And they can go on the smart glass pad and just like regulate their bodies, regulate when they ovulate, regulate all that stuff. If they want a boy or a girl, they get prepared beforehand to like have through the tech in their body. They have a tech in their body that's not AI, but it's something that has to be more regulated through a smart glass pad. So it's like they can just regulate their births. The babies are genetically augmented in the womb to be stronger, faster. What I remember of that was it's like the cells, when the cells are splitting, the tech is augmenting the DNA in certain ways. And after that's done a few hundred times, the tech just lets go. And then the baby just self-replicates with this augmentation by itself. Once you've done it a few hundred times, the cells start splitting and they just keep the augmentations that the tech made to the DNA. And so yeah, like I got to a point where it was just a long time, and I said,
so you had multiple children with this woman.
I had two. I had a boy and a girl with her, and they're not like, because they go through this, and I didn't know what they went through, so they don't like having children over and over because it's very exhausting to them wearing. And I mean, they live over 3,000 years, so it's like they could be single for 100 years, and it's not a big deal to them. They can go on to another relationship, and that's just kind of how they think. You have to kind of think about it in that relation the whole time. It's like it's different for them. And So yeah, I got to a point where I didn't know what was happening. I said, let me hold my son. Let me hold my son. And she wasn't listening. And I tried holding him, and she knocked me down. And they're pretty strong. The women are about as strong as a strong man, and the men are much stronger. And then there's like a warrior caste that's stronger than the men. And I got up and I was going to say something like, why did you hit me? And I just took a step forward, and she just started screaming at the top of her lungs. So I just walked out, and I told the navigator about it. And he said, you need to talk to Elder. Like, that's what he told me. And Elder was like mother's husband. And he was kind of like the judge. He would handle disputes, things like that. Like, that's what his task was. He was very tall. He always sat down. He never walked. He had a white beard. And I went to him and I told him what happened. And he said, you didn't hurt the baby, did you? And I said, no, of course not. I just wanted to hold him. And then he said, well, so-and-so is available. She just arrived on the ship. And I said, what do you mean? And he's like, well, you could be with her. And I was like, no, I want to be with Swaru. And he's like, no. He's like, that's just the way it is. And he explained to me that the women go through like a 10-month bonding process with their babies where you can't get near them. And it's just like, they're just with their baby and that's it. And then the men go through like a rutting process. I don't know, probably equivalent to around every 6 months for about 2 weeks. So it's like, if the men are doing this and the women are bonding with their babies, they're kind of just genetically made to be like polygamous. It's just how they are. Like, the men usually have more than one wife, and there's a lot more women than men, and that's just the way they are. And
Interesting.
Yeah, so I got with this other woman for a while. We had a baby. She was pregnant, and then I came back to Swaru. Like, mother came to me and said, Swaru, she's ready to see you now. And I was just kind of like, well, I'm with this other woman, and she hit me, and I didn't, and I don't want to talk to her right now. And it was weird. It was like this, I can't explain it, unconditional love, I guess you would say, like a wave of like unconditional love kind of went over me through her. And I kind of just dropped everything. And I said, you're right. I'll go back to her. Like, it was just like this strange kind of, everything just kind of melted away. And I went back to her, kissed, and I held my son for the first time. And I found out that that's just the way they were. They go through like this bonding process. And if a man does have a wife, he usually has 2 wives because of this, and that's just the way it works. And yeah, I mean, that became my life for a while. Then I eventually saw their world. Well, we got into a skirmish with reptiles, and we helped. Robert told me, he said, you didn't free the moon, but you helped them, is what he told me. And it helped them in the sense that they were still kind of living in like a brothel mentality. Like I said, there were brothels, and I encouraged them more to kind of like break off and create families for men to take responsibility for their children. And I also recruited a large amount of them too for this war.
From the moon?
Yeah, because the moon was freed, but I wasn't part of that. I wasn't part of that whatever that was. But it was already free, but it was kind of like in chaos. Like, it was like in disarray and disorder. But like, all these people were still there. And they really had no like leadership. They had a bunch of the Dark Fleet break away and join us. So a lot of these off-world Germans were tired of the reptiles as well. That was a big part of it as well.
Do you think, can I pause you real quick? So in some of my recent psychic sessions, I know time gets weird. Maybe that's what it is. Like, I've seen like this continuously happening, like more members of the Dark Fleet, like laying down their arms or leaving, or I can't think of the word to describe, defecting. So do you think if that happened, if that had already, a lot of that had already happened, do you think that that's just been a continuous thing that's been going on? Or what are your thoughts on that? Because I've been seeing that like recently too, but I could maybe be tapping into another time. Like, time's kind of weird. And then you go into like pocket realities that are created through these programs, and then that can be kind of confusing. Like, I have contact with some of these beings and some of these positive programs, and they say we're on the moon, but we're not on your moon. We're in like a parallel reality moon. But Do you have any thoughts on that? So, like, defecting do you think this defecting from these darker programs and kind of liberation of the moon and all of that, has that been going on for years and years, you think?
I don't think very long. I think it's something more recently in the sense that probably, I mean, I could be wrong, but as far as like the moon, that was something fairly recent as far as where we are right now, right here. That wasn't something that happened very long ago.
Okay.
But I mean, I'm sure they always had defections. And I remember on their world, like I was eating, at the dinner table with a family, and they were talking about how much they hated the reptiles and they despised them. And they talked about it openly once they were in their world, like in private, but they couldn't
In
mention
the
it
German world.
on the German world. Yeah, they talked openly about how much they didn't like them. And yeah, but I'm sure. But right now, it seems like major defections are going on. When I was in, it seemed like major things. They're surrendering entire ships, things like that. To the Solar Warden and Tigetans and things like that. Like, we're tired of this. If we give you this technology, the ship, we'll join you. We want free passage. And also some like things happen too. Some double agents occurred, and that happened as well. You had like ones that we thought were loyal, but they weren't, and they became almost like double agents, and they betrayed us. So it was kind of a risky thing. Some that were still loyal to the reptiles, and yeah, I mean that happened one time. It was actually the guy too. The guy that said I should have you executed for what you did to my man. He took like a personal interest in seeing me suffer, and like the mines of the moon. And even on base, he was the first class petty officer on base, and he didn't like me. He like glared at me all the time because he would go back to Earth sometimes and go back to the Dark Fleet. Like I said, time travel, age regression. They live a lot longer than us. All these things, all these factors. And yeah, and he actually became like a double agent, like a spy on our ship, and was actually able to knock down the shields. And mantises boarded the ship. They have like a way to they cut through the hulls of the ship and they board the ship. And it's like how they attack, kind of. And he was able to disable our ship. And that can't happen. That cannot happen unless somebody has like a high access to be able to do something like that, to get into the ship itself. So it had to be like somebody on the inside that did it. And when that did happen, I remember, I had a direct, a telepathic link with the ship, so I picked it up. And yeah, I ran to leader's quarters, made them aware. He said, and leader was, the man and the woman, and they were both leader. And he was a warrior caste, and she was actually my last wife or my last queen, I should say. When you get more than one wife, the men will come up to you and say, "Who's your queen?" In other words, like, who do you trust the most? Like, if we have to relay information to you, like, which one of your wives should we go to? They'll say that to you, like, who's your queen? And so she was like leader's queen, but she was leader too. It's always a man and a woman that's leader. And that's like the same as mother. Their ranks really don't outrank each other, but it's just like a position of authority. So it's like they all kind of have the same authority, but it's just like this position of authority they have.
Mm-hmm.
And I made them aware that, the ship was being attacked, and, their son was with me. They had a boy. He was older now. He was probably in his teenage years almost. And
what did he look like?
I'm sorry?
What did he look like?
Oh, he had long blonde hair. Their eyes are a little bigger than ours, like a fifth larger than ours. But besides that, he was probably 7 feet tall, maybe 6'10", something like that. Warrior caste are bigger than the regular men. The regular men are about 6'3", 6'4". The women are about 5'9", 5'10". Yeah, and the warrior caste are much stronger, and they kind of have more of like a, like an analytical kind of strategic mindset, I would say. Mm-hmm. But because of like with their role, they only produce like Y chromosomes, so they only have boys. So the regular men will have girls and boys, but the warrior caste only have boys, and that's kind of like their role.
Interesting.
And yeah, and well, they told us what to do. I went to the. He went and warned the adults. I went and got the children out of there's almost like a school that they kind of stay there almost all the time. and we got them out of the school. I was carrying a bunch of kids, and like everybody was running, and there was like escape ships that they had. We got to this escape ship, and I set them down, and they looked at me. I had a boy and a girl, and they looked at me and they said, Daryl, Dad, you have to help Mother. You have to help Mother. And it was almost like I could see, because she was with the children for so long, that she had like a strong telepathic link with them. And it was more like she was speaking through them. Like I could see the expression on their face. Like it was like this, it was her. Like I could just tell it was her. So I told the navigator, like, don't leave. And I ran, and I was still in communication with the ship, and it was saying things like, breach Hall 3, Section 7 and 8. And it was like close to their room. So I ran into their room, and they were just sitting down on chairs, just kind of waiting for it to happen, because they were like elder. They couldn't like really move that fast or anything. And I said to her, can you run? And she said no. And she looked really scared. And then elder said, take her. So I just picked her up, like fireman carried her, like over my shoulder. And she was remarkably light, like 90 to 100 pounds, like remarkably light for like a 7 foot tall woman, or nearly 7 foot tall. And I'm 6'2", so she was kind of like dangling, her legs were dangling near to my knees and everything. And he got up and kind of walked really slowly, almost like the way a person walks on stilts, where they kind of have to shift their weight as they walk, because he was so tall. He was tall. He was like 14 feet. He was tall. Like he couldn't stand up all the way in the room. He had to like crouch down and kind of shuffle out the door, like shuffle his feet out the door. And I leaned up against the door to see like what was attacking us, because the ship was down. And I saw mantises. And mantises, it's like, I wouldn't call them good or evil, but there's so many of them because they're insects. So they do anything from like mercenary work, invention, science, things like that, augmenting DNA, but there's so many of them. And they do have like mercenary work. And that's kind of like what the Dark Fleet is. They're kind of like mercs, but they're also kind of like indentured servants to the Draconian Empire at the same time. So yeah, they're like the big mercenary force that you see. Mm-hmm. And he ran after him. I heard him yell, and then I just took off the other way to like the escape area. And I heard her yell, so I knew he was gone. Like he was gone. And I rounded a corner, and her legs got tripped up in my knees, and I almost fell. And I kind of looked up, and by the time I got to this other hall, I saw the navigator, and he was like waving me, like, "Come on, let's go, let's go." And they were like right behind us, and I didn't know why they didn't fire. Maybe they wanted her, maybe they wanted me. I didn't know, but they were just chasing us. And these mantises, they have like 6 legs, I think it was, and they could carry like they carried their weapons, but they have 4 legs that they run on, so they're very fast. And I got to the escape. I handed her off to the navigator. I saw a flash of light, and the doors closed. And I felt something like tapping my leg, and I thought it was one of my kids. And I looked down, and it was my hand, like my fingers, like hitting my leg. And like I looked across, and like I saw all this burned, like it was all gone. It was just like bones and ribs. And I looked down, and I saw like my heart beating. And as soon as I saw my heart beating, like I fell down to my knees, and I fell on my face. And I remember like they were still trying to talk to me. And he was like telling her to stop crying, like Swaru. He was like, stop crying, talk to him. And then I just kept saying, it's dark and I'm cold. It's dark and I'm cold. And then everything just went black. And I woke up, and I was in darkness, and I reached out. I wanted to reach out with my right hand, and it was gone still. And so I reached out with my left, and I felt like a cylinder, something smooth. And I went to look up, and I felt like a horrible pain, like all the way down to my toes, like pins and needles. And I grabbed like the back of my neck, and I had like a cable in my neck. And I was like, oh, I'm in a healing tank. Like I realized I was in a healing, because like when you're like, there's no brain activity, they kind of hook this cable up. So it kind of tricks your soul, your consciousness into thinking you're still alive. So it sends like electrical impulses through your brain to make your soul still think you're there while you heal. And I heard the navigator say sleep, like he was like he was out there like waiting for me. And I'm kind of missing parts, and I apologize, but it's just like, I don't know if we have a lot of time. I'm kind of darting back and forth. And
You're fine.
That's how these memories kind of they shape for me. And the sense, this is less linear. Like I have to kind of really write this down and get more linear with it. But it's less linear for me, just in the sense that it's more of a good memory, and they say that you remember your bad memories more because it's like an evolutionary thing. So the bad things won't happen to you again. So these memories are kind of, it's almost like going on a nice vacation. They're kind of like all over the place, splotted. But yeah, so I just went back to sleep, and I woke back up, and I was out of the tank. Like I woke up in a bed, and I was almost like in like a medical gown because it was still U.S. Navy working with them. I was kind of in a gown, and I went out, and Swalroo was there with like our 2 kids, and I saw Mother like very sad, like she was just sitting there by herself, sad. And I talked to them, and I remember I said to my children, I said, "Help Mother," and they said, "How can we help Mother?" And I said, "Just sit on her lap, just be there with her, like be close to her." And I said, "She was there for you when she was strong and you were weak. Now you need to be there for her when she's weak and you're strong." So they went up to her and they sat on her lap. They started playing with her hair, which is what they did. The kids would sit on Mother's lap a lot and do that, like play with her hair. And I went back into the room, and the navigator was there. And I said, this has to be like, this has to be sabotage. This couldn't have happened, like something to knock down the shields and knock down the ship. Like it has to be someone on the inside. And he said, I think you're right. And I said, we have to find him. And I said, can I have one of your uniforms? And he thought about it and he said, yes. And so he gave me one of his uniforms because I just had this gown on. And I pulled it on and it was kind of like footy pajamas. It was at first. And it wasn't until like you put the flaps together and slid your hand up, and then it formed into like one material. And then as soon as it formed in one material, it all kind of snugged up on your body, and it even created like arch supports for your feet and cushioning. Like you felt yourself rise up a little bit, like a half an inch, like it gave you like cushioning for your feet and arch support. But it wasn't until like you put the flap up. And
wow.
I walked out and like another Navy officer saw me. And he said, why are you wearing their uniforms? And I said, vendetta. And that's like all I said. And it was just like a way of saying, like, I'm not taking this off until we find out who did this, is kind of how I felt. But it was just after that, I started dressing like them. I started growing my hair out like them. I stopped wearing like, the Solar Warden uniform. And then, yeah, we eventually found the guy, and it was him. It was like this first-class petty officer who was actually an off-world German. Who got onto our ship, who really didn't like me. He didn't like me when I was in the Dark Fleet. He gave me a hard time when I was in the Dark Fleet. He would always look for me. But I remember, like, I tried to talk to him before he was going to be executed. He was interrogated, and they're going to execute him. They behead. And I said to him, we could have been friends. Like, why did you? Mm-hmm. And he said, like, I would never be friends with you. And then he just gave me a real bad attitude and ticked me off. And I said something like, as that blade's passing through your neck, remember you're a Judas to your own species. And I walked out. And yeah, so that happened. And I mean, we got to a point where we were figuring this out. They interrogated him. They were figuring out where it came from. We found some of the insects, the mantises. We were finding out more. It was just kind of like we were getting different clues here and there. And eventually it led to this like draconian ship. And they wanted to kind of declare peace, I guess you would say, this draconian ship. They were, they're deceptive. You can't trust like lower fourth density. It's like shadow realm, like spirit world. You can never trust them. And, so
that's okay. We can kind of go back since we've been going for almost an hour and a half now. There were a couple specific things I wanted to ask you about, or just to mention that I thought that you've mentioned before that I thought was really interesting. With the Taigetans, did you say that your DNA specifically, like you kind of have like a specific type of DNA that is compatible with them? That also they were kind of like, that was kind of sought after. Could you kind of touch on that?
Well, it's a specific, like a DNA. I think it's only 2 or 3% of like the world is genetically compatible with them. And I believe most of those people are like Northeastern European. in the sense of like Finland, the Baltics, like Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, like those kind of countries and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I'm mostly Welsh, so I don't. Yeah, but that's what Robert told me. It's mostly like a northeastern thing where you can find like similarities. But like Robert told me, and I remember this too. I remember like they had like a family day about once a week where, everybody on the ship, all the Taigetans would kind of get together and they would discuss their week. It was just like a day off, like a day off to where they would all talk, and you would watch the kids play, and the kids would just tag and stuff like that. They would run around, and it was something like they really weren't interactive with their kids, but if they two kids bumped into each other and fell down, they'd laugh, like things like that. And I heard the kids like speaking kind of like this babble. It's like they were kind of doing that, and I just started speaking back to them. And I remember, I think this was when Leader's son was very young. He like walked right up to me, and I was sitting down, and he put his hand on my knee and like locked eyes with me, and he was really amazed. And like all the kids came up to me and like locked eyes with me, and it's kind of eerie. You have like these larger-eyed people like all staring at you at once, and they started like communicating with me. But like in more of this pig Latin way, as Robert described it to me. And I was just able to just talk right back to him. It was almost like almost pure emotion with a couple words here and there. It's kind of like how it felt. Mm-hmm. And then the adult said, like, how do you do that? And I said, how do you don't? Like, how do you not? Is how I said, how do you do that? How do you not? And they didn't know. Like they're like, we can't, there's like a specific age. Like once they get to around 6, we can no longer do that. Like once we get to around 6 years, like once they get to around 6 years old, they can't do this anymore. And they found that really fascinating that I could do that. And that was a huge thing. And it was also because Robert called me something called an empathic telepath, where I can do that, where I don't need to know a language. I don't need to know like a culture or a background. I can just kind of pick up on what another ET is saying. So it's almost like a universal translator. They do know most of the species out in this world, but it was just something they found interesting that they wanted to kind of put into their genetics, is kind of like how it was like brought up to me. But yeah, it was primarily that. It was like these kids spoke like a type of pig Latin. They found that out. Then they found out I was like an empathic telepath. Then they found out I was like a spliced soul, where it was kind of like it was like Andromedan or Lyran and reptilian. And that like Lyran and reptilian are like polar opposites. So that doesn't really happen that much. So it's just like for like them to find like a spliced soul like that, plus being that genetically compatible with them, plus being like an empathic telepath, which reptiles are hardly ever, like never anybody has any kind of that. And it's not that my soul is like reptile, it's just like it's a spliced soul with others, you know what I mean? And that's kind of rare in itself. So all these things were like a rarity. And also Robert explained to me that 3rd and 4th density beings say 5th density beings is naive. So it was almost like a way to kind of take their naiveness away too. They felt like they kind of believe your word all the time. They're trusting. They kind of have a belief in like, if this is mutually beneficial for both of us, why would you ever betray us? Like they don't understand that concept of the reptiles, the way the reptiles think. But anyways, yeah, like that, those were like the major key points that even Robert told me. And that's like a different memory, because that's me talking to an officer in St. Maughan. These other memories are more of like, I don't know. I think the reason why people have such a difficult time remembering these things in these secret space programs, it isn't so much the mind wipe. It's trying to get 5th density memories into 3rd density words, because it's so much different. It's such a different reality. I can't even try to explain to you like how different the reality is. And I think that's a big stumbling point that people don't understand. It's like, I don't know. It's like trying to get the information, like it's trying to get the water from a fire hose into a coffee straw. You're getting so much more information at 5th density compared to 3rd. It's so much more of enlightenment. So it's difficult to kind of grasp these thoughts and grasp these memories, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that actually makes total sense. Hard to put into words, but makes total sense. I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really great point. So there was one other thing that I wanted to ask you about, and then we can start wrapping it up, that I found really interesting. So some of these like Solar Warden missions, I remember you saying that that I guess it was at St. Moggan's. There were these people in the programs, but they just stayed on World who had signed up in the program, and they were kind of get like trigger warning, dark, but doing the adrenochrome harvesting and had like the children and stuff.
Mhm.
And I don't know if you have memories from this or you were just became aware of it afterwards, but Solar Warden going in and rescuing some of these children or taking that down. Do you want to speak on anything like that? Anything that you can recall or what you were told?
Yeah, I mean, I was with Leah by this time, and she was leader, and I made leader. I had made leader at this time, and it is something that elder ETs do. Like once they reach around 2,000 years, they could look down timelines, they could see the best paths, and it's almost like ET warfare is a lot of time travel, cat and mouse, if that makes sense. And so I wanted to help free these different underground bases. I volunteered for this, and they wanted me to specifically go back to St. Moggan to free that the caverns in that underground base. So I specifically went back to the original base I came from in the future. And we went through a portal, like, it's all kind of the same, looking glass, portal, Stargate, jump. We went through one, and yeah, I mean, like, it was like we walked through this portal. We didn't walk very far at all, and we saw these children like stacked in dog kennels. They were stacked, I don't know, 5, 6 high, 5, 6 wide. They're just stacked on top of each other. Mm. And Leah wanted to go, and she was pregnant at the time. And I said, "There's no way you're going." And she's like, "I have to go." Like, she wouldn't explain herself. I was like, "Okay." I just, she was older and wiser than me, so I said no at first. I protested at first, but then she said, "I'm going." I said, "All right." And then we kind of went through a training session, like a miniature kind of crash course. How are we going to do this? I had 2 other warrior casts with me, her and myself. So it was like 3 men and her. And then we went to go and we went to put on the suits, the cloaking suits that are, that can handle the rounds, that they can handle like long range fire and things like that, high velocity fire and things like that. Because that's what we were expecting. We weren't expecting hand to hand. We were expecting that. And I went to give her a suit, and she said, "No, I can't wear a suit." And I said, "Why?" And she said, "Because it'll scare the children." And I was like, "All right, but you stay behind me." And she said, "All right." And then we walked through this portal, and I immediately, like almost immediately, saw these kids in cages. And I said to the others, "We have to." I heard a man and a woman talking, and I said, we walked down this other kind of doorway, and we cloaked, and they came out, this man and the woman, and it was the man and the woman, the U.S. Navy woman, and this, the guy called the Goon, this Satanist with a shaved head. They were both Satanists, but he had a shaved head. He was a big guy. He was British Army. And they were kind of talking about them like they were stock. Like, today we're going to take out, we did 1 and 4 yesterday or last week. We'll take out, 11 and 12 today. It was like they were kind of going through cycles of like, who do they just harvest adrenochrome for? Who needs a break? It was just kind of like they were doing it like that. Mm-hmm. And I took out a concussion grenade. And I remember he said this to me in the bar, which is really weird when I was like, "Me, Daryl, here, Daryl." He's like, "Yeah, you said you hit me with a concussion grenade." And he's like, I said, "What's that?" And he said, "I don't know. I was hoping you could tell me." Like, he was trying to figure things out too. But time travel is strange. But so I got out this concussion grenade. I just set it powerful enough to knock the wind out of him, knock him down. Because it was almost like I wanted to know before I was going to do this. I wanted to know. And I rolled it out, and it hit him, and it knocked him down. And I walked up to him, and I kicked him over on his back, and he was laughing, like he was expecting me. And I kicked him a couple times. I said, "Stop laughing." And I pointed at the cages, and I said, "All of this, you would do this to my children, wouldn't you?" And he said, "I would." And I pointed at the others behind me, and I said, "And you do it to theirs as well?" And he said, "Yes." So I shot him. And the woman tried getting up, and she stumbled and fell down, turned around. The last thing she said was, "No, please don't." And I shot her. And I looked around, and I said, "We need something that, these kids will run away if we try to take them out of these cages. They were feral. They're never held. They don't know how to speak. They're kind of like animals. Robert explained that to me. I was, I'm sure I was briefed before I went out. They're pale. They've never been held or talked to. They don't speak. They'll attack you if you take them out of the cages. They'll bite you. They'll scratch you. They're kind of like wild animals. And Leah said, open the cages. And I said, no, they'll run away. And she said, open the cages. So I was like, all right, open them. We all open them. And it was just like, she kind of put her arms out. And it was just like what Mother did kind of. It was like this wave of unconditional love. It felt like this white light kind of came from her. And like all the children just came to her and like held on to her. And it was like really like this miraculous thing that I was seeing. It was like all these like wild children they just held on to her. They were holding on to each other. If they couldn't hold her, they were holding her arms or legs. And then like I started hearing other voices and started firing upon them and things like that. And they were screaming like, it's the king, it's the king. They were saying that. And we eventually got back to the portal and we got these children out and got them out of this portal. And what they were going to do to them is they were young enough to where they could still learn language. So it was basically like they were going to give them a complete mind wipe and just start over from square one. So like, their average age was probably around 5. So they're still young enough to where, I think it's once you get to 11 or 12, if you've never learned a language before, you don't have the ability to learn language anymore. But it's like it was around 5 years old. But yeah, that's what we took them back to their world. It was a complete mind wipe, and it was basically what they had to learn from square one. And that's kind of like what they did. They had to rehabilitate them in that way. And they have ways of doing that. Medbeds heal, medbeds wipe, but they can also heal, psychological damage. They can, there's different ways of going about this. But yeah, that was the plan for them.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's important. To also know that there are, that's part of what Solar Warden is doing in some of these positive factions going into these missions. Okay, then there's one other thing I want to ask you about, and then we can wrap it up. The other thing is, if you could try and share this one quickly, but there was something that you mentioned before that I found very, very interesting. Where I think it was after you got out of the program, there was something, you were at somebody's house and there was something in your eye, and a Taigetan, do you know what I'm talking about? Like told you to pull this thing out of your eye. That was trippy because it's like you're here and you're also up there communicating with yourself in real time.
Yeah, when I got out of the Navy, I don't know, it was years later. And I was kind of just very self-destructive. It was like, and Robert told me this would happen. When he looked down my timeline, he said, most people commit suicide in the first 6 months. You're not going to be able to accept this. This is going to be very difficult for you. And I was kind of going that path, and I was just drinking a lot and things like that. And I really didn't have the nerve to kill myself, but I kind of walked in the bad neighborhoods just to see if I could get, I don't know. And there was like this woman outside of her door, and she kind of waved me in to come in. So I went to her house, and it was dark. It was only like, the stove light was on. And so, when only the kitchen light's on, the light like above the stove, like that was like the only light that was on in the whole house. Mm-hmm. And so it was kind of like shadowy, like I could see more of their outline more than because the light was behind them, and I was in like a dark room. And I was very drunk, and they were just kind of staring at me, and I was staring at them. If I tried to talk, they just stared at me. And I was just like, this is weird. But I don't know. I was so drunk. I just said something like, do you care if I lay down? And they said, yeah, lay down right there. And I laid down on the floor. I think they were waiting for me to like pass out or something. I lay down on like the living room floor, and I heard like this strange voice, and it was like trembly, and it sounded kind of like I'm scared. Like it sounded like that. It was very trembly and high pitched. It was bizarre. And the woman kind of reassured the voice. Like I was still kind of awake, but I was like, my eye closed, I was just kind of out of it. And then she said, it's all right. It's fine. And then all of a sudden I felt something like cold on my face, cold and wet. And then I felt like the sensation, like when you rub your eye too much, and it feels like you kind of strain your eye, your retinal nerve, you kind of strain it. And I felt something wet and flapping on my face, and I grabbed it. And I was just like, what is this? And I tried pulling it out, and I felt like I was going to pull my eyeball out. And then I heard this voice, like this male voice said, get it out now. And it was like alarming. And it was trying to get my attention. And he said, you have to get this thing out now. And I tried pulling it out, and I said, but I'm going to pull my eyeball out. And he said, well, then pull it out, get it out now. And then I heard the woman, the two women, like one of the women said, like, hold them down. So then these two women like hold me down. They're like on top of me trying to hold my arm down. So now I'm in like panic mode. So I just like wrap it around and I kind of reinforce it and I just pull it off. And they're pushing against me to try to keep me down. And I just pull it off and I clench my eye together like as hard as I can so I don't pull my eye out. And I can just feel it come out. And I kind of knock them off of me. And this thing is like slapping around in my hand. It's like cold and wet. And I just throw it down like a dark hallway. And I go and I just yell. Like I just yell like really loud. And they just kind of like go back on their couch and they're like looking at me. And then on the coffee table, I see what looks like a puppet. And like I said, it's very dark, and all I could see is kind of shadows, like outlines of them. So I look down at the puppet, and I look down at them, but I'm curious to know what this is. It's like this strange puppet. And I'm looking back and up and down. I'm getting closer and closer so I could see. And I see like this thing that has like crab eyes, kind of like above its head, like snake eyes. And it all it had was two claws, and it was like a rust brown, and it was like scaly. And it was almost like I said before, these memories kind of come back. And when you have suppressed memories, and this was one of these moments where it kind of came back and then went back into the subconscious again. And I remember like Taigetans, as like an insult, they would call reptiles lizards. And reptiles do not like being called lizards. And I just yelled out lizard because I saw this scaly thing. It was almost like a subconscious thing. And the women almost like one after another, like they were shared conscious, said, he knows. And I just went, whoa, like I just yelled and I ran out of the house and I started yelling like I was drunk and yelling. And like the whole neighborhood came out and was like, what's wrong? And I was like, I tried to explain to them what happened. And I noticed, and this goes to like Donald Marshall kind of thing where he talks about this, the Brill lizard, their mailbox had polka dots on it. It was a white mailbox with colored polka dots. And he said that's a way that they distinguish each other. And they call them drones. And Robert explained to me that there's 3 different types of drones. There's the drone that I saw, the brown, like ET that took the computer apart with the big black eyes. Then there's a drone that's the reptile. And then there's a drone for somebody who has been droned, who got that, proboscis is what Donald Marshall calls it. It comes out of their head. It's almost like their spinal fluid, like their consciousness kind of pulls out, and it has a horn at the end. And the horn kind of gets behind the eye and then wraps around, cracks through the skull, I guess, and then injects this fluid into the brain. And once it injects it into the brain, the person dies. The consciousness leaves the body, and then this kind of takes over. And it takes like weeks, they say, as far as what his information is.
So basically, that whole thing was a kind of like a parasitic drone-like thing to basically take control of you.
Yeah, and I think it was like, I was told that higher density beings can manipulate lower densities, both positive and negative. We're third. So I think it was a Kino or the reptile that possessed the Kino, a 5,000-year-old reptile, he told me, that possessed the Kino. And he somehow manipulated that to happen, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think that was his last try kind of thing. Or well,
trying to mess with you.
To try to get me one more time, yeah. Anyways, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. I was gonna say, but then the voice that you heard, get it out now.
Well, when I was on the ship, yeah, with the navigator, when I was, on the Nimitz.
Taigetan ship.
Taigetans, yeah.
And Solar Warden.
And Solar Warden. I remember the navigator, one time something got his attention. And then he kind of looked down at the floor. He was kind of like, and I was like, over here. And he was kind of looking down at the floor. And I said, like, what are you doing? And he goes, shh, like, quiet. And I said, what are you doing? And I could hear him kind of say, like, get it out. Like he was just kind of talking at the floor. And then it was over. And then he looked up at me and he said, that was close. And I said, what? And he said, like, you were in danger. Like you almost died and I had to help you. And it was because like I said, it's like you're sharing a consciousness. It's like I was there on the ship, but I was also on Earth at that same exact time when that danger happened. And it was also because he had such a strong telepathic link with me, because it was almost like we shared the ship together. It was like he was navigation, I was pilot. It was kind of like we were sharing the mind of the ship, the consciousness of the ship, and we were kind of working together so we had a very strong telepathic link. And that's kind of like how he picked it up. He just was aware that I was in danger on Earth, and he was able, I guess, because I was right there, maybe because he was that powerful enough or had that powerful enough of a telepathic link with me that he was just able to communicate with me. But as I said before, it's almost like you're sharing the same soul. It's like you are the same soul, even though you're two different bodies, you're still the same soul. And I feel like that's how it happened. But yeah, he was able to be aware that I was in danger at that moment in time and help me out. And it kind of like woke me up. It kind of got me from like a drunken stupor to like more alert and awake. And he was kind of like the one that snapped me out of it to get it pulled out.
Wow. See, that's just trippy and super fascinating. There's a little echo there. Well, thank you for sharing that, Daryl. So we've been going for almost 2 hours now. I know there's probably tons more, and you did a really great job with remembering a lot of these things that have happened. And yeah, are there any kind of last things that, and you have contact with the Taigetans now too? Like you still sense them, you feel them here and there?
I think I'm a second guesser, and that was something that he always said to me. The navigator was, stop second guessing yourself and go with your first thought. Like your first thought is the true thought. Like I remember, because I said to him, I said, like, how do I, because I was still new to telepathy, and I said, how do I know this isn't just the voice of my head or if this is you? And he just said, it's not. He said, stop second guessing yourself. Always go with your first thought. Like your fifth density is a lot of pull, I would call it, instinct. There's a lot of instinct involved. You're not necessarily told something or made aware something. You're not necessarily told something just face to face or in your, it's almost like a pull that you feel, like an awareness. Dangerous.
To the truth.
Something's going to happen. Something's happening here. It's less of a, it. It's less of knowing it as I'm speaking to you one-on-one like we are right now, and it's more of this like an instinct. Like you're kind of following an instinct, and that's what more like fifth density is. And so you could do kind of extra things that way, in a sense, where you could pick up on danger before it happens. You can. It's like that, that feeling you get when you're thinking of someone, and all of a sudden that person just walks around the corner, and you're like, "Hey, how you doing?" It's like, just think of it like that, but more so, like more in your face, stronger. It's that same kind of instinct that you have, where you just feel like it's almost like you're manifesting this to happen, but you don't know if it's manifestation or if you don't know if it's instinct. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. Well, they are around you, and I can feel them, and I've seen them, and I actually saw what appeared to be a tall, young son of yours standing behind you a minute ago. Probably about 15 minutes ago. I saw, how you said that like the fifth density, they're like faster, and your XO officer said that if he were to take off his density belt or his bracelet that was keeping him in third, he would almost look like a blur or like a light. I saw that behind you. I don't know, it was like 10 minutes ago or something like that. And I tuned into it, and it was like a blonde male, kind of skinny, tall kid, felt a little bit younger. But yeah, so they're around you. I'm sure they're talking to you and guiding you all the time. Keeping an eye on you.
Thank you. I hope so.
They are. Okay. Well, is there any kind of last words that you would like to share? And then do you want to share where people can find you?
Well, I would just like to share, because of all these things that are happening right now with the 1,500 troops and being at the border, as far as the last I heard. I know you said earlier before we started filming, you haven't been keeping up, you haven't been aware, but I've been keeping up a little bit. And this seems to be a lot of what Robert was telling me, a lot of the United States will declare war on Mexico kind of thing. And this seems like a big picture thing. It's something big. As I said, they lived thousands of years, so they can see the big picture.
Mhm.
So, I mean, I think this is positive ETs. I think Kruger is what Robert told me too, a corporation from another Germany that won World War II, and they have like the ability to jump from universe to universe. There's 8 different universes we know of. They're helping us out. They have a technology where it's like impossible to lose a war. They could go back in time a week or two, resupply, put more troops here, they can fix their mistakes, run the war again. But anyways, Robert told me something about the day, like after Easter. So I would say like something, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if it's going to be this Easter. He told me this years ago. And this wasn't like a channeling. This was a captain in the Navy that just told me this in his office before I left. And he said after Easter. But he did notice how the time Trump was supposed to win the second election, according to Looking Glass. And looking down my timeline, he could see that wasn't going to happen. So Looking Glass was actually wrong. And he basically just saw my future and was able to tell that, no, Trump didn't win the second election. And his opinion was they were more entrenched than we thought. So maybe they did it on purpose. Like he really didn't know. But he said things were going to speed up a lot faster because we're 4 years behind schedule. And that's kind of like what seems like what's happening right now. But yeah, and so I don't know if the after Easter thing was the original timeline with Looking Glass or if it was just Robert looking down my own individual timeline and picking this up. But yeah, I would say, yeah, big things are going to happen. I don't know. Prepare yourself. Get ready. I don't know if if it's going to happen the way you thought it would, but I think big things are going to happen.
All right. Yeah, I mean, since I've been out of town, I kind of shut everything off for the last week, so I'm just kind of getting resituated back, and there is a lot, definitely a lot going on and a lot going on behind the scenes. Yeah, over the next few months, I think a lot of cleanup is happening, and also a lot of back and forth is happening. Like we're in like the nitty gritty of it right now. So yeah, we'll see what happens, and I'll share, as I get more updates and stuff on that, and communication and contact. I'll share as we go. And thank you so much for sharing the information that you've gotten, your story plus what Robert, your Navy officer, told you. It's super fascinating with the Looking Glass technology and all of that. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, it's going to be an interesting ride.
Well, yeah, we shall see. Yeah. We shall see. And my website is daryldjames.com. DARYL, D is in Delta, James.com. And I have a lot of my videos there. I need to get on that and start putting up more. I'll put Europe videos up there soon.
Beautiful. And you need to write your book.
And I need to write my book. Yes.
Yeah. All right. Perfect. Well, thank you everybody who is here right now. Please give this video a like and drop a comment. Share any questions you may have, any comments you may have, and go check out Daryl, his website. And I will see you later, Star Brothers and Sisters. Bye. Thanks for coming on, Daryl.
All right, thank you. Bye.